Bell. The results of a mass psychosis are nothing short of devastating. Jung studied this phenomenon extensively and observed that when a society succumbs to madness, its members become morally and spiritually inferior. They sink unconsciously to an inferior intellectual level, becoming more unreasonable, irresponsible, emotional, erratic, and unreliable. But perhaps most terrifying of all, Jung noted that crimes the individual alone could never stand are freely committed by the group. This explains how ordinarily moral people can participate in atrocities during times of mass psychosis. What makes this phenomenon even more insidious is that those caught in its grip are often unaware of what's happening. Just as an individual experiencing psychosis can't step outside their own mind to recognize their delusions, there's no Archimedean point from which those living through a mass psychosis can observe their collective madness. So, what causes a mass psychosis? To answer this, we need to first understand what drives an individual to madness. While there are many potential triggers, such as drug abuse, brain injuries, or other physical ailments, we are particularly interested in psychological or psychogenic causes. These are the most common culprits behind mass psychosis. The most prevalent psychogenic cause of psychosis is a flood of negative emotions, particularly fear or anxiety, that drives an individual into a state of panic. Now, imagine this panic spreading through a population like a contagious disease. That's the starting point of a mass psychosis. When in a state of panic, it's natural to seek relief. It's mentally and physically exhausting to remain in such a hyper-emotional state. While there are healthy ways to cope with panic, such as facing and overcoming the fear-inducing threat, another escape route is a psychotic break. Now, contrary to popular belief, a psychotic break isn't a descent into greater disorder. Instead, it's a reordering of one's experiential world. It blends fact and fiction, reality and delusions in a way that helps alleviate the feelings of panic. It's a coping mechanism, albeit a maladaptive one. Silvano Arrietty, one of the 20th century's foremost authorities on schizophrenia, outlined the psychogenic steps that lead to madness. First, there's the phase of panic, where the individual starts perceiving things differently, becomes frightened, appears confused, and can't explain the strange occurrences they're experiencing. This is followed by what Arrietty calls the phase of psychotic insight. During this phase, the individual succeeds in putting things together by creating a pathological way of seeing reality. This allows them to explain their abnormal experiences. Arrietty calls it insight because the patient finally sees meaning in their experiences, but it's psychotic because it's based on delusions rather than a realistic understanding of the situation. In essence, the delusions allow the panic-stricken individual to escape from the flood of negative emotions, but at the cost of losing touch with reality. As Arrietty puts it, a psychotic break can be viewed as an abnormal way of dealing with an extreme state of anxiety. Now, let's scale this up to a societal level. If a flood of negative emotions can trigger a psychotic break in a vulnerable individual, then a mass psychosis can result when a population of vulnerable individuals is driven into a state of panic by threats, real, imagined, or fabricated. But here's where it gets interesting, because delusions can take many forms, and madness can manifest in countless ways. The specific manner in which a mass psychosis unfolds will differ based on the historical and cultural context of the affected society. In our modern era, one form of mass psychosis stands out as particularly threatening: the psychosis of totalitarianism. Arthur Versluis defines totalitarianism as the modern phenomenon of total centralized state power, coupled with the obliteration of individual human rights. In the totalized state, there are those in power, and they're the objectified masses, the victims. In a totalitarian society, a disturbing transformation occurs. The population is divided into two groups, the rulers and the ruled. Both groups undergo a pathological change. The rulers are elevated to an almost godlike status, which stands in stark contrast to our nature as imperfect beings who are easily corrupted by power. The masses, on the other hand, are reduced to dependent subjects of these pathological rulers, taking on a psychologically regressed childlike status.